Yo, what's up? This is Jay Dennis, and we're back with another Ranked, yeah, and reviewed. And today we are doing yet another polarizing band that people love to hate or hate to love, and that is ATTILA, the new metal garbage core southern metal band from Hot Atlanta. And I've been listening to these guys probably since 2012 on and off, around the time that they were starting to become more relevant. And with their most recent release, Closure, as of like a week or two ago, I figured why not revisit their discography and maybe an album or two that I've missed along with their new one and see how does this stack up. It's 8 studio albums. I know there's probably another like demo from like before 2008, but I'm not counting that one. I'm doing 2008's Soundtrack to a Party up until their most recent release, Closure, from 2021. I'm going to do something different today. I'm going to give you guys my mock ranking first, and then we're going to see how it stacks up against the actual thing, and then I'm going to end off with my top 10 favorite tracks. Now, kind of like with a Mirror and Bring Me the Horizon, two other bands that are popular to hate and love, kind of polarized fan bases. I didn't care for this band when I first listened to them, but, in the early 2010s and up until the mid 2010s, band kind of grew on me. Franz, the vocalist, has some styles that I actually dig and even tried to mimic a little bit. I tried to do the fast screaming there for a while. So I can appreciate the different styles they've done. But part of me was like, how well has this band aged? Was this just a band that I liked and now I hate, or it's just like, ugh? Turns out I went back and listened to all the albums, and for the most part, no regrets. I'm just trying to think whatever else here. Just polarizing band, but there are some solid musicians in that band. It's a very heavy, well-executed band at times, and sometimes they're just kind of cringy. But Franz is a solid vocalist on paper. It's just his lyrics can't be taken seriously, which I don't think he markets himself that way anyway. But the guitar player, he writes a mean riff and plays a mean solo, and the drumming and the rhythm section are pretty solid too. So let's just go ahead and get into it. This is my mock ranking. This is what I thought it would be ahead of... I don't do this with all bands. I only do this with bands if I'm very familiar with their discography. But this is my mock ranking, and then we're going to go through the actual ranking, and then we're going to see how they stack up against each other. Before re-listening to all the albums, I thought from worst to best it would go like this. Their most recent album, Closure. Their first album, Soundtrack to a Party. Villain from 2019. Rage from 2010. Chaos from 2016. About That Life from 2013. Guilty Pleasure from 2014, and then their best album would be Outlawed. Now, let's actually see how this plays out. I try not to make it a self-fulfilling prophecy, but oftentimes my mocks are pretty damn close, but this one kind of came with some surprises, so let's get into it. At the number 8 spot, my least favorite album from them is their new album, Closure. I knew it. I knew with the lead singles they put out that this was going to be their worst album. I do not like this mumble rap kind of like light fry like rapping that he does in this album. It's like he does a lot of different vocal styles over the years, and a lot of it sounds good. This doesn't. This whole I don't want to go la la da 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 da, like it just sounds like a really piss poor execution of like turn of the century new metal that I love, but it just does not sound good. There's only like 2 good songs on this album, and they're barely good. You got Broken Happy, which has very much an Outlawed sound to it, and then the closing 2 tracks, Canceled and Clarity, are good enough, but they're not great. Anxiety is also a pretty good opening track, but there's nothing great on this album. Attila's worst songs are on this album. You got Empty Cup, Metalcore Mansion, which is probably their worst song. When I first heard it and saw the music video, I thought it was not a good song. I gave it a 6 out of 10, which means I don't hate this band. I don't think they're mediocre, but a 6 out of 10 just means it's okay. Like I can I can stomach it. It just sounds like a really, really, like they leaned a little too far into the generic side of metalcore with this release. They dabbled in new metal with Chaos and Villain, and they did it pretty well, in my opinion. But they just did it pretty bad on this album. G Squad, really annoying chorus. I don't know what they were going for with that. Viva Las Vegas. Look, I just moved to Vegas. I will never listen to this song whilst living in Vegas. So again, Closure has bad rapping vocals for the most part. Really doesn't have much of an identity. No through line, no consistency. It just sounds like a bunch of songs thrown together. Really nothing new or innovative or heavy or fun to listen to, except for Broken Happy, and maybe if you can get behind the chaotic sounds, Clarity may be canceled. 3 or 4 good enough tracks out of 10. And Shots for the Girls, a little callback to Shots for the Boys. That's also a good song. But half the album has Attila's worst songs. The other half, nowhere near their best material. So at the number 8 spot at the very bottom, easily Closure. I knew it would be their worst album, and it was. And like with an album title like that, you would hope that there would be more redeeming qualities to it. Number 7 spot goes to their first album, Soundtrack to a Party, which also has some of their worst songs. But since it's their first release and it was the MySpace days of the late 2000s, and it was, young and raw, and before they really found their sound, I can give more forgiveness to this album. Sure, on paper it doesn't sound as good as the advanced sounds of like Closure in terms of like the mixing board and everything, but there's more dynamics and more consistency in this album. Deuce Deuce is the only song that I really like. Rest of the album's kind of boring, kind of just boring, generic, late 2000s death metalcore with a little bit of like party sounds, like in Let's Start the Party with like the synthesizer and everything. The whole album sounds kind of the same, really nothing memorable here. The vocals are undeveloped. It's hard to listen to, but the music isn't bad. So that's why I say it's got some redemption to it. Which, by the way, the spread from the worst to the best is I barely gave Closure like a 6.8 out of 10, which just means it's not even a good album. It's just really an okay album because half of it has songs I can stomach, the other half just aren't great. Soundtrack to a Party is a 7.1, which means it's barely good, and that's just on the merits of what they were doing at the time and what was to come. I mean, Franz's vocals still sound decent on this album. It's just the mixing and the rawness. It doesn't always come out best on the first album. So, the number 6 spot, where there's a bit of a jump in quality, and by a bit, I mean quite a bit of jump. This is where we start to get into great territory, is their sophomore release, Rage. Now, more polished sound, better vocals, pure heavy, solid riffs. My only issue with Rage is there's no hooks, but this is kind of Attila's heaviest album. There's really no gimmicks or goofy lyrics or rapping or anything. This is just pure Attila heaviness. So if you want like a pure, raw, heavy album that sounds good, Rage is your album. But if you're like me and you like the hooks and you like a little bit of a mix here and there and you don't mind Franzilla rapping pretty well like he does on some of the newer stuff, then Rage might not be your favorite album. But songs like Temper, Jumanji, and The Invitation, pretty cool songs, but really nothing excellent on this album, nothing really great on this album, but it's a solid 27-minute listen. I definitely overlooked it over the years, but it did age well, and it's certainly worth giving it a shot. But Rage is just kind of a quick, easy album to listen to, very consistent, a little bit of stuff sounding the same here and there, but it's definitely better than, it's a huge step up from Soundtrack to a Party, and it's certainly better than their most recent release, Closure. So number 6 spot goes to their 2010 release, Rage. Number 5 spot probably goes to the album that is probably the one I'm the most familiar with, listened to it quite a bit when it came out, is their 2013 release, About That Life. This is when they really leaned into the whole cringe Attila rapping it was kind of on the forefront of like the new metal revival. So bands like Falling in Reverse, Attila, and others were trying to like inject rapping into their metalcore and their other post-hardcore stuff. So they're like, oh, it's rap, so it's new metal. It's like, no, there's more to new metal than there just being rap in the vocals. There are new metal bands that don't rap at all. But anyway, About That Life actually does have a pretty solid identity to it, and it's got quite a few catchy tracks and some of my favorite Attila songs. I mean, you got Break Shit, you got Call Out, which is a really immature song, but the riff is good. It's fun. It's funny to listen to. You know, he says fuck Westboro Baptist Church at the end. And the last two tracks, Party with the Devil, which is just heavy as shit, in the New Kings. Best track on the album is the closing track, The New Kings. I have a vocal cover of it on my YouTube channel if you want to go watch me be the best vocalist of all time. But it's the number 5 album because, you know, there are a handful of songs that aren't typically that great, like Hellraiser or Back Talk or Thug Life. Definitely not great songs, but the rest of the album, you know, Middle Fingers Up, About That Life, those are pretty solid singles. Unforgivable is a non-single that, in my opinion, aged pretty well. And then Shots for the Boys, much better than Shots for the Girls, but definitely not one of the best Attila songs. So all in all, About That Life, I got a lot of sentimental memories to that album, especially when trying to like rap or scream fast like you would hear on the New Kings or Party with the Devil. But overall, 38-minute album, you know, about half of it's pretty damn solid, the other half is passable. So it's by no means their worst in any way, but it's by no means their best. It kind of just sits comfortably in the middle. All right, now for the back half of the discography, or the top 4. So at the number 4 spot, we have an album that I greatly underestimated, and that is their 2019 release, Villain. The only reason why Villain's not their best album is just because it's a little bit inconsistent, but there is some heavy shit on here, and some of the new metal elements that they leaned into from About That Life, Guilty Pleasure, Chaos, especially Chaos, they leaned into it a little bit more on Villain, and it turned out pretty well in songs like Manipulate and Subhuman. Toxic is a great song also, and Villain is one of the heaviest songs they've done. It's probably the best song on the album. Something interesting that I took from re-listening to Villain was, after hearing some of Amur's newest stuff, like Take a Look at Yourself and Hindsight, I'm noticing a little bit of Amur influence in Villain. I don't know if that was intentional. I know Hindsight came out after Villain, but I don't know, man. I'm hearing some kind of like low-end, really raunchy heaviness that you would hear from like Joshua Travis or Frank Palmieri of Amir, and maybe they talked, I don't know. But Villain is actually a satisfying album to listen to. I don't hate any songs on here. The only song that I'm not a huge fan of is Still About It, which is a callback to About That Life. And then the last song, Bad Habits, is just kind of generic, but they're not bad songs. They're by no means their worst songs. Those songs are pretty much better than any song on Closure. But Villain's got a you know, out of 10 rateable tracks, you know, about half of them are pretty damn good. And I was pleasantly surprised at how much I enjoyed this album again. I listened to it when it came out in 2019, and there were some songs I liked, but I kind of just slept on it a little bit. Really no follow-up, but now I certainly enjoy it a lot more. Number 3 spot goes to their 2014 release, Guilty Pleasure, which was very much a nice quick turnaround after the 2013 release of About That Life. Guilty Pleasure was a nice surprise. This album came out when I started dating my wife, so aside from About That Life, Guilty Pleasure is definitely the album that has the most sentimental value for me. If you can consider an album that goofy and that unserious to have sentimental value. I love the drop G sharp riffs on here. I love that they tuned down lower for this album. I think it was a pretty decent sized step forward from About That Life. It's just kind of like that goofy, shameless music that Attila writes, but there's just some confidence behind it. So songs like Hate Me, Guilty Pleasure, as goofy as they are, like, they're just fun to listen to. Again, it really is a guilty pleasure of an album. If we're talking about the heavier, more serious stuff, you know, Break My Addiction, Horse Pig, fantastic songs. The album is definitely their most consistent, one of their most consistent. But, aside from the opening track, Pizza, Sex, and Trolls, the rest of the album is pretty solid. Every song is north of an 8 out of 10 for me, like an 8.3, 8.6. Highest rated track is Guilty Pleasure and Horse Pig at an 8.7. Dirty Dirty's a fun track, very sexual. Fake Friends and The Cure are also great closing tracks. So overall, Guilty Pleasure did age well. It was the first album I listened to again when I came back to review this discography, and it was a great way to start it. So at the number 3 spot, we have Guilty Pleasure, where they introduce lower tunings, a little bit of really well-polished sounds. With regards to the ear, this is one of the most pleasing to listen to. If you like polished, heavy, well-mixed and mastered material, Guilty Pleasure is an easy album to listen to and easy to lift weights to, especially if you like rap music too. It's a solid mix. Number 2 spot, which this album also got higher than I anticipated, the 2016 release, Chaos. If we know anything about the year 2016, it certainly was chaos. I think Chaos came out this summer, or in the late spring of that time. Chaos, much like Guilty Pleasure, is a very consistent album that aged well, but this one just happened to age well a little bit better than Guilty Pleasure did. The clean vocals that he introduced, which are just his clean, kind of like nu metal sounding vocals that have some grit behind them, I think they sound great. I think Bulletproof is an awesome song with an awesome hook. It definitely, that chorus kind of sounds like something I would have heard skateboarding back in the day. There's a consistent theme throughout this album, and it just kind of sounds like a more mature Attila album, which might sound like an oxymoron, but it really is. I mean, Ignite is probably one of their best opening tracks. Then you got a freaking onslaught of solid tracks. Bulletproof. You got my favorite Attila song, Public Apology, which is probably their most nu metal sounding song. So of course I love it. I gave that song a 9.3 out of 10, which Attila having songs above a 9 out of 10 is, at least to me, kind of unheard of. But what they do well, and when they lean into it, it's pretty damn solid. Obsession is also a heavy, catchy, awesome song. Mosh Pit, definitely one of the most different sounding songs, but it's catchy, it's well executed, and definitely probably a solid live track as well. Let's Get Abducted is kind of reminds me of Devil Wears Prada for some reason, but another great solid single from the time. And just the back half of the album, Legend, Queen, All Hail Rock and Roll, and King, just a solid, consistent group of songs. Really don't have too many comments to make about them. It's just Chaos aged really well, and there's not a single song on here I don't like. It's like Guilty Pleasure, except if I'm really going to split hairs, 11 rateable tracks, the fact that Ignite is a much better opening track than Pizza, Sex, and Trolls, it gives it the edge. And then, of course, you have a high-octane song, in my opinion, like Bulletproof and Public Apology, just better singles, too. So at the number 2 spot, comfortably sits Chaos. But at the number 1 spot, which won by 0.2, Chaos got an 8.45. Number 1 spot, it got an 8.6, so 0.15. Number 1 spot goes to Outlawed from 2011. This was basically the album that got me into Attila. I forgot what made me want to listen to them. Maybe it was Payback, maybe it was just the fast screaming, but I got the album. I listened to it quite a bit back in 2012 and 2013 when I was, single and lifting weights and working at Disney or whatever. Got a lot of great memories to this album, but this is just kind of their most compact, well-rounded album where you kind of get the best of almost all worlds with Attila. There's no modern day influence on this album. It's just kind of it's like got the heaviness of Rage, but it's got some of the fun guilty pleasures of About That Life or Guilty Pleasure, but just a little bit tamed down and injected into Outlawed. So Outlaw's kind of like that perfect median between the super heavy, super serious Attila and then like the overly gimmicky, goofy Attila that you get from like their more recent releases. And like I said, Chaos, they kind of tamed it back. Not that if they're goofy, they're worse, but it's just, I don't know, when they're kind of serious, they just sound better. And you definitely get that with Outlawed. Outlawed does have the best opening, aside from Chaos. I'd say Ignite's slightly better than Outlawed with the opening tracks, but fucking Light Me Up. Light Me Up is just one of the heaviest songs they put out, and then the every mother like a mega sick, I took a picture, I'ma elevate the party like I knew, like, you know, just that fast scream after that final chorus. Like, the guitar work on this album is disgusting. Another round, very great guitar riffs, cowbell, memorable chorus, memorable guitar solo, really making drop C sharp sound incredibly heavy. They come back and get raunchy with Nasty Mouth. Smoke Out is a solid single that aged pretty well. I liked it better today than I did back then. Sex, Drugs, and Violence is just such a nasty, heavy song. White Lightning is solid, but also the closing track, Payback, which is may or may not still be one of their most popular songs. You know, tired of the bed and let a minute get ahead so I can get her better looking, let her settle in the thought of it. And I know she really wants it, I can see her dripping wet and salivating in the thought of it. Like, it's just... And back then, like in 2013, I would try my best to develop my scream and actually do that. My screaming has taken quite a hit lately, and I haven't really been practicing, so I can't do it right now. But I still remember the cadences and the lyrics. But Outlawed is just easily their most... it's their best album. I don't know if it's as easy to listen to from front to back as an album like Chaos, but Outlawed just has more standout tracks and more, I guess you would say, consistency or proper heaviness that really elevates this. And if we're just looking at on paper with where they were at in their career, from them to really take a big step forward with Rage and then take an even bigger step forward with Outlawed at that point in their career is more impressive than them taking a step forward from Guilty Pleasure to Chaos. So I factor that into my scoring, into my ranking. How impressive was the release for the time? You know what I'm saying? All right, so let's compare. I got the bottom two correct, and I got the top pick correct with the mock versus actual. But Chaos scored 2 places higher. Guilty Pleasure scored 1 spot lower. Villain placed 2 spots higher. About That Life scored 2 spots lower. And Rage got a spot lower because Villain ended up being a better album. Top 10 Attila tracks are Horse Pig, Payback, Party with the Devil, Manipulate, Villain, New Kings, Bulletproof, Light Me Up, Another Round, and Public Apology. I love when I have a band that's got like multiple albums like this, but I only have to go to like 3 or 4 of their albums to get my favorite tracks, because it's very rare that I have like a top 10 track from a worst album. It's just unlikely. So anyway, I was right. Not a self-fulfilling prophecy, but I just had a feeling, just based off the singles, you know, the generic radio rock sounds of Day Drinking, and then just the cringiness of rhyming Metalcore Mansion with Metalcore Manson. I just knew that Closure was going to be their worst release. So they got plenty of other solid albums you can listen to, though, even as recent as 2019, though. So I want to thank you guys for listening to this. Be sure to like and comment and subscribe, and comment what you agree with or disagree with. Do you think Attila sucks, or do you think that they're awesome? I personally think they've got a lot of merit to them. I've seen them live. Franz, as much of a polarizing figure as he is, I know he's got some solid aspects about him. And again, the musicianship behind the music is solid. It's kind of like Limp Bizkit. The music's awesome. It's just, can you get past the goofy lyrics and the polarizing front man? But hey, I think that caps off the trilogy of polarizing bands. Be sure to check out my Amir and Bring Me the Horizon one. Or if you want to go non-metal, be sure to check out my most recent video of Green Day or Blink-182. I've ranked their discographies as well. Check out the ranked and reviewed playlist. And again, leave a comment. What do you agree with, disagree with? How would you have ranked it differently? What stories do you have? And thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.